Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Heenan. I work at HomeSmart PV and Associates. I've been a licensed real estate agent for approximately 25 years. I teach forms and contracts, amongst other things here within our firm. I am not a certified contract trainer. I just read and just kind of share with what I have read. And we've already discussed on the contingency form, meaning that we've already discussed paragraph 1 through 6 in previous videos about what happens when a buyer writes up an offer, entering into a contract, closing escrow, putting the home up on the market, keeping the property in the accurate listing status on the MLS. And then we went through paragraph 7, and paragraph 7 discusses what if the seller gets a backup offer, the mechanics behind that. Those are in 2 previous videos. This is going to be a very quick, brief video. What this video here says, what if the seller wants to cancel the buyer? Whether it's for backup reasons or whether it's because the buyer is failing to do something. The seller just wants to say, hey, buyer, we tried to work it out with you, but it's just not working. So how does the seller go about canceling? Remember, a cancellation can be done unilaterally. You do not have to have another person's permission to cancel. Picture it like you're dating. If you're dating somebody and one party decides that, hey, it's just not working, I want to cancel, well, then the other party doesn't have to say, no, you don't have my permission to break up with me. You can just break up by just telling them, it's over, but you got to do it right. It's got to be done in writing, and you got to make sure that things are delivered to the proper place so you can prove that they did receive it. And so that's what we're going to be dealing with here. So in paragraph 9, it says this paragraph 9 talks about the seller's right to cancel buyer, and it lists all the rights that the buyer has to cancel. The first, so if you're going to read in paragraph 9A, it says after first giving buyer a written notice to remove buyer contingencies and provide proof of funds. So let's say the buyer fails to provide proof of funds, then the seller can cancel by sending them a notice. Could be on the NBP form. If they want to just remove their contingency about about the home they're trying to sell, they just want to cancel based upon that, then they would just go here and sign on the bottom. If they're going to do something else other than that, then they may want to use the notice of buyer to perform, which is what it says to do in several places, like right there. It says it again right there. It says it everywhere. Okay. So here 9A, let's go through these item by item. It says 9A, after first giving buyer a written notice to remove buyer contingencies and provide proof of funds. If buyer fails to take all actions specified in paragraph 7B. What is in paragraph 7B? Whoops, let me get rid of this. What's in paragraph 7B? It says removal of buyer contingencies and proof of funds is selected if seller accepts a written backup offer. So you got to accept the written backup offer. Don't you accept the written backup offer, then it continues. It says and provides buyer a copy of the signed accepted backup offer within the time specified. The seller shall have the right to give written notice to buyer to, in writing, remove this COP contingency, remove the loan contingency, and provide verification of sufficient funds to close escrow without the sale of buyer's property. And then it says, if you're just going to remove the COP form in purple, it says seller may use the bottom of page 2. Okay, so that's what you use the bottom of page 2 for, is just to remove the COP contingency. If it's going to be something other than just the COP contingency, then you may want to start using the NBP form, which is what we are going to continue with here in paragraph 9B. After first giving buyer a notice of buyer to perform, if buyer fails to enter the contract. And that's mentioned in paragraph on the top of paragraph 1, it says that you got to enter into contract right here. Let me get the arrow out for you guys. So it says in paragraph 1B, entering into contract, or it says only to close of escrow, whatever it is that the buyer is failing to do, that's is how the seller will write up the notice of buyer to perform. And then in blue, it says in paragraph 9C, if in blue, if buyer fails to close escrow. In 9D in purple, if buyer fails to deliver escrow evidence. In 9E in green, if buyer fails to deliver evidence of the listing. In 9F in orange, if buyer fails to deliver evidence of removal of contingencies. And then in 9G, if buyer gives notice to seller of either party's cancellation of contract. And so if the buyer fails to, if either party to the previous transaction, so let's say for example that this buyer who wrote up an offer on this home gives notice to this seller that they're canceling, and this buyer wrote up an offer on this home, then that means that this buyer shall give this buyer notice that they sent notice to this seller that they're canceling. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So this way you can keep the transaction very open and very transparent. And then in paragraph 10, it says buyer's right to cancel. Buyer may cancel the agreement in writing if prior to buyer's removal of the buyer's property contingency specified in paragraph 1A or B or C. And it says here, if in yellow, in paragraph 10B, buyer is unable to enter into contract, or in 10B, either party of buyer's property gives notice to the other to cancel. So if anybody gives anybody notice to cancel, then you got to keep the transaction open by saying, hey, I can't fulfill my obligation because the buyer on my property is canceling, therefore I cannot buy yours. Now, in paragraph 11, when did time periods begin? If I write up an offer that's contingent on my home closing escrow, so I have the funds to purchase another one, when should those time periods begin? Well, you want to get out a calendar and you want to do the math on these. Because if I check the box, let's see what it says. By checking the box, I'm going to delay it on the day after buyer delivers to seller any of the following. So if I check this box in paragraph 11A, what's going to happen is that the time periods will begin the day after I email the listing agent that, hey, I got an escrow. We have an acceptance. Here's proof. Here's a copy of the purchase contract. So therefore, my time periods for all my loan appraisal, inspection, if there's any HOAs or any preliminary report, all my nine for to get homeowners insurance, all my nine contingencies mentioned in the purchase contract, those time periods will now begin the day after I give you the seller notice that they will begin. And as it continues, it goes, so it says, what do I do once it says on the day after buyer delivers to seller any of the following? Well, what is the following? Escrow evidence for buyer's property, purchase contract, buyer's election in writing signed by buyer to begin the time period. That can just be an email. Buyer's removal of this contingency for sale of buyer's property. In other words, you can just do that on your own CR form, your own contingency removal form. And then here, if you look, buyer's deposit in paragraph 11B, it just talks about the buyer's deposit. When is the buyer going to deliver their money into escrow? I think you should always do that in the beginning, but that's just my opinion. That's how I would do it. And so you would check the box. It goes, if you want to delay it, if within 3 days after, remember, days after is a defined term in the purchase contract. 3 days after buyer delivers to seller any of the following escrow evidence. So we can deliver our deposit and title the same way we're going to deliver our time, we're going to begin our time periods in paragraph 11A. Then the buyer writes up this form again is attached to the purchase contract, and the buyer would sign it. The seller would also sign it. And this bottom section of the COP form is only used, once again, as a reminder, if the seller wants the buyer to remove the COP contingency. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to email this on out to you guys so you guys have a copy of this. This is the third section of the COP video. Hopefully this will clear anything up for you all. Take care.